Hi, Paul Nashwadi coming to you live from the show floor at KubeCon Amsterdam 2026. I'm here with LocalStack talking about developing and test cloud environments. How you doing?
It's great to be here. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Of course, my name is Waldemar, CTO and co-founder at LocalStack. Happy with the project, since the early days. We started as an open source project, and in 2021 we built a company behind it, and yeah, happy to chat more, of course.
Excellent, excellent. Well, test and dev is near and dear to my heart. This is what I do every day. This is my job. I focus on this. So tell us a little bit about LocalStack. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing. Very exciting time at the show here. So let's start there.
Absolutely. Yeah, so what we do with LocalStack is we basically give you a local cloud development environment that effectively speeds up the feedback cycles and accelerates your cloud testing and development. So it's basically a tool from developers for developers that we put out there. And the main pain point that we're addressing is cloud development is sometimes just slow and a bit tedious, right? So you have to push every change up to the cloud and wait for the deployment to happen. And with LocalStack, we bring all that to your laptop and really significantly speeding up the dev cycles.
So you can do your development offline, online, and work on it, push it as it connects and such?
Exactly. Push it to your CI/CD pipeline, run your tests there, and so on. One of the interesting trends, of course, and I'm sure we're going to talk more about AI and agents, is now with agentic workloads coming in, more and more tests is being generated by agents, and then again, LocalStack, the AI sandbox is like a really strong, powerful use case that we're exploring more.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting to me because what I'm finding in our research is organizations are looking to ship code very fast. In fact, what we're seeing is 24% of organizations want to ship code on an hourly basis, yet only 8% are able to do so. And that's largely due to the fact that there's inefficiencies in the CI/CD pipeline across the SDLC. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about operational efficiencies. You talk about working offline, working in your environment, pushing it, bringing the code together. How does this all work?
Exactly, and especially you have these compounding effects, right? If your CI pipeline, fails, 10% of the time, or it runs like a couple minutes longer than it should be, like those are compounding, once you start testing more aggressively and more frequently. So that's why we put a strong focus on make sure you have a well-working test environment. Start with your local dev sandbox with LocalStack, and then push it into CI, and then further down into staging production, right? So really accelerating that whole journey. As we mentioned, like with agents, the whole thing, just the whole value proposition is just accelerated and amplified, because now what we're basically seeing is code being generated almost exponentially more and more by these agents, but the code that actually lands in production is growing at a somewhat linear or sublinear pace, right? So you have this huge gap of validation where agents need to figure out things, and need to try and test things out, and it becomes more a matter of the quality gates that you put in place to let those agents kind of give them guardrails how they operate, right?
Yeah, well, what we're seeing in our research is 50% of code, actually it's August of 2025, 50% of code was written by AI, right? We reran that study and found out that by November, December timeframe, we found that 70 to 90% of code was written by AI. So it's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, but let's talk about from the buyer's perspective. There's increasing pressures around costs. There's increasing pressures around control, security for cloud environments. What does this mean to you? What does this mean for LocalStack? I mean, from a buyer perspective, not from a developer perspective.
Exactly. So we have, I would say, three main pillars in our value proposition. It's efficiency gains, it's quality of the software you're shipping, and then also cost savings, right? The efficiency gains, I think, is pretty clear, right? So if you talk to a head of engineering and you tell them your dev team, spends less time waiting for deployments, but they have these quick local feedback cycles, that again has a huge economic value as well. The second one is around quality. It's really all about shift left. Make sure that you catch bugs early on in the pipeline, early in the process, before you actually push them out into some kind of shared test environment. And the third one is about just really operational cost savings, right? So I think there's some studies by Gartner and others around 30% of cloud spend is just waste, right? So wasted resources, somebody forgets to shut down a cluster over the weekend, this kind of thing. And that just basically goes away without solution.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, that operational efficiencies, cost effectiveness, that really kind of help drives it. The other thing that I want to kind of touch on here is, we talked about the CI/CD pipeline. We talked about, AI-assisted development code. That's accelerating code releases. I'll tell you from my trending data, in 2022, I ran a study, and I only found that 29% of organizations do continuous integrated testing in 2022. By 2024, that number jumped to 66%. Wow. Right, so a significant jump. Yeah. But with the acceleration now from 24 to 26, right, with the acceleration of AI-generated code, how do we overcome this new choke point of validation and testing?
Exactly, and it's almost like the the resurrection also of like compute, right? These agents need to run somewhere. You of course need the models and the GPUs, but then also the actual testing process, building the software, compiling and testing it, right? So that creates almost like a compute bottleneck in a sense, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be a huge, big value stream also for providers out there, including the whole Kubernetes CNCF space. So yeah, I think it's still good advice to really test very aggressively early in the process, right? Because you want to make sure that there's no bugs in production, that you make sure you tested all the edge cases. One of the things that we offer in LocalStack, by the way, is also what we call chaos engineering. It allows you to simulate different fault and error conditions that can happen in the cloud. So things like a database is at capacity and no longer is able to serve your requests. So that's a pretty common use case, all the way to things like, what if US East 1, what if the entire region goes down, right? Which is something that actually happens once in a while.
Yep.
And you can actually test these scenarios in the sandbox environment, risk-free and ahead of time, basically.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that there's also testing it in a sandbox environment to show you testing ahead of time, but there's also observability during the production environment. So like day 2 operations, and you want to make sure that you're looking at the observability that's being fed into the CI/CD pipeline earlier in the cycle. So basically, ideally, you would have those actionable insights at the build stage and not at the release and not at day 2, certainly not day 2. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, 100%. One trend we're seeing more and more is also having certain observability and also security quality gates as part of the CI process, right? So assume you have some kind of infrastructure as code defined with Terraform, CDK or some other mechanism, and then being able to detect, let's say, security flaws or potential vulnerabilities early on in the process. You want to make sure that you don't hit these things in production and then detect them there, but really early in the pipeline, right?
Yeah.
And again, it kind of all boils down to this matter of shifting left and detect as much as you can in the early stages.
So lots of great insights here. There's a lot that we talked about. Are you seeing a lot of this kind of being talked about on the show floor? I mean, it's a busy show, right? So are you seeing a lot? You're hearing a lot about this?
Absolutely, yeah. It's great to talk to so many different companies in the dev space, like from smaller startups that are popping up in there all the way to the large ones. So definitely a very, very exciting event here, and having all this conversation. Interesting to see where the space is moving. The whole world of software engineering, I think, is almost reinventing itself in a sense, right, with agents. So I think it's going to be a very interesting year, pivotal year for all of us.
Very good. Well, thank you for being on today. Thank you for being my guest on this show here. And thank you for watching. Paul Nashwati coming to you live from the show floor at KubeCon Amsterdam 2026.